be reed makers. Some of you may not. If you've made cane reeds, well, that's good, and there's a lot of stuff that applies because spruce reeds are indeed cane reeds. But I'm just going to say that there's huge differences also. I also would like to just kind of give you a real quick sense of my impressions about the coming about of this spruce reed thing. People have been dabbling with this for a number of years. I and other makers have been making spruce regulator reeds pretty much regularly for quite a long time now. And they were wonderful because they were stable and the material was real consistent once you found a spruce that was working for you. The other thing about it was that, well, it just worked. Nice tone in the regulators. Flat reeds for chanter reeds, that was, you know, there was some successes along the way, but I will just tell you that D chanter reeds were incredibly elusive. Michael O'Donovan, my dear friend, many of our, close friend and associate, he's been trying for, a long time to make, he's been making spruce reeds, but he finally came through with, with one or two reeds, but the numbers of failures were huge. So a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, 3 to 4 years ago in that slot, actually it's probably more like 3, through a little exchange of information between 3 or 4 makers that I'm aware of, and probably this was happening in other places too. And this involved a little tidbit of information from Makoto Nakatsui, and from a lot of communications back and forth with myself and Michael O'Donovan. Interfacing with Kinsho Kane from time to time. And only, on my part, only an awareness that Benedict had made some spruce reeds that were quite good, but maybe wasn't doing it regularly for D-chanters. And then it all of a sudden coalesced, and what was a venture that would have very low yield turned into something quite the contrary, and it started to be more and more successful, more and more reeds, to the point that the success rate has gotten to a place where it is just uncanny if compared to cane reeds. And one of the problems with cane reeds is that here in California, it seems that the cane has suffered in the drought years. So that's a problem. Then again, even without that, it was not uncommon to get a batch of cane, to split some of them up and find that, half of them have twisted on you when you split them. And you can sort of try to use them, but it's not ideal. And then also just finding that suitable cane that you would really get excited about seemed to become more scarce. As a maker and as a reed maker, I can't mess around too much. I have to supply myself with quite a lot of reeds, along with customers and people who have other chanters that I agree to read, because I won't read anything. But I will read, chanters that I think I can read. So one of the great things about spruce is that when you land on a spruce that's working for you, it's not hard to lay in a stock that's going to give you 1,000 reeds, or at least several hundred. And that's a lot of reeds. And it's incredibly consistent. And there are flaws that come up, and you have to look out for them. I will just say this about, the other thing I want to mention is that spruce reeds have a great resilience when it comes to humidity fluctuations. They're not perfect, but on a scale of 1 to 10 of how much a reed reacts to humidity changes from low humidity to high humidity, and closing down in low humidity and opening up wildly during the high humidity. Spruce, I would put spruce at somewhere around, in terms of positive performance, like an 8, where I was put cane down around 1 or 2, because there's guys down in Southern California, when the Santa Ana winds come, they have just learned to just put their pipes away if they're playing cane reeds. You could try to adjust it, but you might end up ultimately doing damage to the reed by, trying to adjust this beyond its adjustable limits, really. So getting into it here, the first thing we need to do is decide what kind of spruce we're going to use. And we want instrument grade spruce. We want spruce that has been selected by somebody who knows their business about instrument wood. We want spruce that is split out of a larger piece, rather than just making the assumption that it's going to be straight if I saw it and then saw it and saw it. We want spruce that is hopefully not too expensive. I'll tell you, people have bought guitar tops, and that turned out to be really not a good way to go at all, because you'd only get one slip, and you didn't know if the grain was going to be running diagonal through the slip, and you want the grain to be really straight. And we're going to go through the process of how to achieve that, because in spruce, here's a block of spruce. Now, I doubt that you can see this very well, but, whoa, there. I know you can't really. So, on the end here, I have put pencil lines because it's too hard to see. I've put pencil lines that follow the grain line that you can see on the end. So that's great. So if I turn it up this way, this would be called the radial face. Looks like a guitar top or a violin top. You can see the edge of the annular growth rings. This way, on the other hand, is called the slab face. That's where the growth rings are running this way. And you really can't tell much. You can't tell if there's going to be a diagonal when you split this, or if you cut it, which is a bad assumption to make. And I'll tell you what, taking a block like this, which originally came as, maybe about 2 feet long, this is what the instrument wood suppliers call brace wood. And it's the best deal, because they really go to great lengths to make selections of tops for violins, violas, and cellos. And you can buy that, you can do that, but you pay a lot more for it. And they have the same wood, but they end up with pieces that aren't wide enough to yield a cello top or even a violin top. So they just label it all brace wood, and you cut it up and use it for sound bars, sound posts, or if you're a guitar maker, you use it for all the bracing, for the back and the soundboard. So you end up with a long chunk of brace wood, really the best thing to get, and you lop it off with a handsaw or whatever into blocks that are, roughly 120 millimeters long. I mean, this might vary. If you may find that you have a design that evolves where you actually need longer slips than I use, or most of the people that I know use, on which case that's fine. But in my case, I'm cutting it off to blocks that are 20 millimeters long. And then I know that the grain is, as I pointed out, is pretty vertical to this line. Boy, it's a weird thing having to deal with this. Where's my finger going to go? If I move it this way, it goes the wrong way in the screen that I'm looking at. So the grain's quite vertical to this baseline. Not so much if I hold it this way. Whoops. Right. You can see. So this is the one I've selected as being the baseline. And I would take that and I would cut off maybe 15 millimeter pieces. I would bandsaw them off, like this. You see? It fits better on that end. And then I end up with a block. And the block has the grain vertical this way, so that if I look at the end of it, I can see that the grain line is parallel with this long flat side. I can see on the face edge, I can see that it's running true from side to side. It's not varied like this. But if I turn it this way, this is the slab cut, as I was explaining before. This is the slab cut. I cannot tell what's happening with the grain. And I'm going to split this block. And the reason I'm going to split it is that it's very possible when you take a block like this and you split it, and look at that, it is not parallel to the original surface on the bottom here. The split line is, you have two wedge shapes. So if I had just assumed that the grain was straight with this one flat base edge, and I had used that as a backside for sawing off slips, I would have ended up with slips that had grain run out. And in extreme cases, here's an extreme case. I only have half of it. I cut the other part up. This is really wedge shaped. So I was only able to, this was originally about, twice this height, actually a little more than twice this height. And I was able to get some slips out of it because I have to plane this surface after I split it, and then use that as my reference surface for sawing off a few slips. I even go to the extreme of planing between every cut. And I use a plane that looks like this. It's a Stanley. It's on 1885 or so. Stanley number 5. And I use it clamped in a vise. Okay? Because if I have that in a vise, I can take a block of wood, lay it down on there, and I can, do that. It's too hard by hand. You have much more control. And when I'm doing that, I want to make sure that I keep the bottom roughly square, which is just a logistic thing about sawing little slips off. You'd like it to be square so that it lays on the table of the bandsaw.
Michael.
Yeah.
I have a question, Michael.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you talked about, you make that initial split off the blanks that as they come sawn to you. Do you use a froe to split with?
I use a knife. It's kind of a small froe in a way. A froe has a handle so that you can twist it. They use it for shakes and shingles. I couldn't find the knife that I usually use, but I have another one that'll work. And I have a demonstration for you. I think I'm going to switch over here and do this on a different, well, maybe I can do it here. Okay, so there's a block. I'm setting it down on the table. Now, if I stood a chisel up on this and held the chisel up high, this would be a very unstable thing and potentially not very safe. And I'll just tell you, it doesn't take a lot of power to split. I've got to find my mallet. Oh, mallet! I know you're here somewhere. Sorry.
Let's say that half the time apprenticing with Michael was spent searching for things like this.
Well, I think
Mike, you got to see my layout here on the bench. I mean, I spent days tuning this thing. Okay, I have a mallet. I don't really want to use a steel hammer, right? Because it'll mess up my blade. I'm just simply going to set the knife on this thing. I'm going to set it fairly as squarely as I can so that it's contacting, and I'm going to put it up kind of close to the handle of the knife. And now that's pretty stable. I'm also bracing my arm against my body. So here I go. I'm just going to go like this. And now I have a split. Let's move this back. I have a split. And you'll see this came out a little bit diagonal, but it's not too bad. Now, I would like to point out about this one is that you can see that there is a wavy, undulating line here. So this has a little bit of wave in it. At a certain point, if that is too much, I'll reject the piece. You'd like it as straight a split as possible. It doesn't matter if it splits a little bit diagonally here, because I'll tell you, that idea of vertical grain in the final slip, it's, you'd like it to be 90 degrees, perfect. But if it's 85 degrees, it's really not a problem. So at any rate, I'm going to go back to a different, let's see, here it is. Right. So I would then take this split, this surface, which will be rough and it looks like a split surface, kind of has a lot of character. You can hardly tell in the picture. Let me see what it looks like in my other camera. I'm going to be switching back and forth here throughout the deal. This is a nice view. Right. Oh, there you go. Now you can really see the detail. That's the split surface, right? And I'm going to plane that with my big plane that I showed you, and it's going to be upside down in a vise that happens to be around the corner. Let me see here. Share screen. Host disabled participant screen sharing. How dare you? Oh, host. Okay.
We can see your hands if that's what you were trying to do. Or are you trying to
I'll show you a picture on my desktop.
Screen share.
Never mind. It's not that critical.
No, it's okay.
I saw him running.
If you can move the camera to the right a little bit, we just see one of your hands, barely. We can.
If you make him a presenter or make him a co-host of this meeting, he should be able to share his screen.
Okay.
Right click on, or
yeah, click on his name under more.
Michael's hand.
Okay.
The idea is I have some photographs of things that it was too hard to imagine getting a camera for a video feed around to where I have those things. It would be so I thought I'll just take pictures and you'll get the idea.
Yeah. I'm trying to find.
Well,
that's go to the three little.
There's Mike.
To the upper right of his name. Go to the three little dots.
Okay.
Say make co-host.
Mike, he's working on trying to become co-host so he can show some stuff on his screen.
Yep.
It's a few photographs, but it's photographs of stuff I couldn't demo in my setup here. If I had more webcams previously set up, which I don't.
That's all right. You're good to go now.
Yeah.
Really?
You're a co-host.
Great. Well, why can't I go to the desktop? It's weird.
Do you have the share screen option down at the bottom?
Allow Zoom to share your screen. Open. Wait a minute. I have to open system preferences to do that. My God. No.
Just press share screen.
Well, I did. I clicked it, and I came up with another pop-up that says Open System Preferences. And I'm not seeing it.
I don't know about that.
No, it's surprising to me.
Okay, here we go. Allow the apps below to contents of screen. There, that'll do it, I think. Zoom will not be able to record the contents of your screen until it is quit.
Don't worry about that. That's my problem.
Later, okay. All right, now let's go back to Zoom and see what happens. Zoom, where did you go? Okay. Share screen. Okay. Oh, I guess I have to go out of full. This is a hassle. I'm wasting time. Share.
We're cooking with gas.
No, I'm there now.
Yeah.
I think I'm there.
Yeah.
So here you're going to go. Are you seeing that?
Yes.
Yeah. So here's the vise held with the plane in it. I just wanted you to see how that works out. It's a brilliant and wonderful thing. I have done so many things in instrument making, stringed instrument making. I've done centered joints with a setup like this with a longer plane. And you have to learn how to sharpen a plane, and you want it deadly sharp, and you want it a very fine cut. But that's nonetheless the way it is. I'm just going to go right now to the next one since I'm already here and I don't want to have to go through this again. And that is, here's a little cheap bandsaw like you can get at Home Depot. Now, I'm not suggesting everybody own a bandsaw, but somebody that you know might have a little bandsaw. And these little ones are the best for it because the blades are only capable of a little bit of work, and they leave a very fine cut. As you can see, I've put a piece of wood on there so that the actual slot for the blade is very small, because I don't want the slip, which is real quite thin. I don't want it to drop down in the hole when it starts to cut, or at the end of the cut. And then I'm just using a squared off piece of wood that I've clamped to the edges of the table, and I've taken a few cuts until I get the thickness that I want. And the thickness that I want is around 1.8 millimeters, give or take, 1.75 to 1.85. It doesn't matter that much at this stage, but it doesn't want to be too thin. And remember that I have planed the surface. I'm going to go to the next picture
And
of it
Michael,
happening.
for those of us,
The surface that is.
sorry, Mike. I was
What?
for those of us that speak imperial, that's about 80 thousandths or so, or
80 thousandths is 2 millimeters. So what you're talking about is maybe 70 thousandths. Right around 70 thousandths of an inch is fine.
perfect.
Forget fractions, guys. Fractions are
Or you just
pretty limiting.
Or you just buy yourself one of those little
So-
calipers that converts between millimeters and inches.
Absolutely, and I'm going to show calipers. They're going to be part of the deal here pretty quick. And believe me, everyone needs calipers. Calipers. I think there was a Western show about a guy with a gun and a palomino. Caliper, caliper. Wasn't that it? When I was a kid. Oh, well. So here you see I'm cutting a block. I've got it all set up. I'm holding the block securely, the backstop, the little fence, we call it. Even if the cut is not perfectly square, it's not the bottom that I want flat on the table. It's the edge that's against the fence that I want flat against the fence. And that way I come out. And I've made sure that the table is adjusted to the blade so that I'm going to end up with a parallel cut. And you cut slowly and consistently. I want to get down very small. If you still have another cut to make, use a couple of blocks of wood instead of your fingers to put pressure on the end to feed it and put pressure on the side to hold it against the fence. Okay, so much for screen sharing. Let's go back to this if I can figure out how to do that. How do you get out of screen sharing? Oh, good luck.
No, go back to it. Go back to the green icon and then give it another press.
Oh, I see the green icon. How about that? Stop share. There you go. And now I'm going to go back into full screen mode so that I can see what I'm doing. So then we're going to end up with a nice little pile. Of slips. And every one of them has one side that is perfect because it came off from that big plane. Because, as I reiterate, I planed between every cut. It only takes 30 seconds to do it. And oh, I didn't say this. This is really important. When you're planing, like, and not holding it in your hand, by the way, when you're planing and you plane in one direction and you get it cleaned up so that you're not seeing the grain anymore, the rough split surface, and you're making sure that it's kind of square. After you get it down about there, turn it around and plane the other direction. And you might wonder why one would do that. And I suggest doing it a few times that way, and you'll get a sense of it. And this is why. Cutting wood, planing wood, using a chisel or whatever, if the wood is not, the grain has to be in a certain direction. It either has to be perfectly straight with the surface, or it has to be going downhill towards you. If it's going uphill towards you, the end of the grain, in other words, if you have run out, you will tear out fibers. And on a plane, if you plane it one direction and all is fine, and you turn it around and all of a sudden it feels like it's tearing, you'll know that you missed the attempt to, you had a failure in the attempt to come up with a perfectly zero run out. Okay, does that make sense? Hello? Are you hearing me? I'm not hearing
Yes.
you. Yeah, good.
Michael, this is Phil. So if you have run out, does that mean that that chunk of wood that you've cut up and done, is that now not usable?
No. It's just a way of double checking your work.
Okay. All right. Okay.
The idea of splitting the piece, you see, the wood is only going to really split parallel with the grain. It's not going to split diagonally through the grain. So when you split it and then you planed it, hopefully planing it quite evenly, that should basically take care of the problem. But a way of double checking it is that when you plane it, turn it around. Plane it end for end, both directions, and you will instantly know, because you really don't want run out. And the reason is you're going to be carving this thing. You're going to be carving a channel in the tails. You're going to be planing it. You're going to be carving it. You can do the scrape all with sandpaper, but I prefer to remove most of it with a knife before I'm sanding, because I like to keep the sanding to a minimum. So does that answer your question?
Yes, I'll get back to sanding when you get there. But yes, thank
Michael,
you.
could you say what run out means again?
Run out means that the grain is not parallel to the cut surface. Run out is a board where there's grain that is running here. Wait a minute.
I think I know what you mean.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to my FaceTime camera. When I split this, it was a rectangular block, and I couldn't see that the grain was running at this angle, because on the surface where I can actually see the grain is on this edge. But I wanted to be able to saw off a series of slips, and I don't want the grain doing this, because that means the grain is in the length of a slip, and the slip being so thin, you're going to have grain that's completely running in and out on opposite sides at a diagonal, and it's no good for a reed that way, because it's too hard to work, and it probably is no good mechanically for a reed. You just wouldn't want it that way. It's not an issue on cane, because cane is just what it is. It's in the form factor that it's in, you know. Everything works roughly parallel to the outside bark. This, is that described it better? Yeah. Okay.
Runout is where you have the end grain on the surface of the, where you have a bit of the end grain, right, showing
Yeah.
on the slip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about the end?
Well, it's the end grain is showing on the surface of the plane.
But that doesn't help.
Oh, it doesn't?
I was trying to describe to you that this block can be viewed from any side, right? And and two of those sides are the vertical, what they call the radial grain surface, the one that where you can really see, looks like a guitar soundboard.
Yeah.
You look at it and you see, I'm going back to Epic Cam. Okay, you look at it and you can see the grain. Can you see that in there? I think you probably can.
Mhm.
When you turn it 90 degrees to the slab cut surface, you really can't see those lines. And you can't make an assumption that the grain in this direction is going to be the same as here. And the end grain will not give you an indication of that. The end grain will only show you if it's vertical or not to the base, which is, you need to know that too. But like I was saying, the end grain, you could actually have 5 degrees of it being off from perfectly vertical to the base, and it really would not hurt your reed making. But this grain, which you can't see, which is the one that's revealed by the split, by splitting the wood, that is really critical. Okay? And you'll see a little more of why that is coming up here. So moving along, and I just have to say, so much of what you're faced with spruce reed making, not only is it different, I mean, it has some things that are very much the same, but it's got a lot of differences. But it's a whole different concept of material handling, and that is something that we have to deal with if we want to get into the actual act of making a reed, which we're kind of doing here. So next, I'm going to move on to, I'm going to take a slip, just a rough slip. Okay, this is a rough slip. It has the nice, absolutely perfect surface from the initial planing on the big plane. It has a sawn surface, which I think you can see little saw marks in there. See, this is real slick on this surface. Well, it doesn't show up that way in the camera, but it is. Take my word for it. Very smooth. This is rough. And and here are the calipers I was talking about. This is 72 thousandths. So actually, like I said, around 70 to 75 thousandths. You don't want to go much below 70 thousandths. And the reason is you're ultimately working to a centerline thickness, which will be determined by the gouge. And you don't want, you want to be able to get the gouge to its full form before or at the moment that you get to the right centerline thickness. Okay, so now this brings us around to the shooting block, and I was going to make a new shooting block. This is a rather unusual block. In other words, it's kind of my design. I've never really seen anybody else use something quite like that. And you'll notice that it has this big central slot. You can kind of forget this side because I'm not really using it. It was for a special thing. And then later on, we're going to use this slot that's on the side. Right now, we're concerned with the central slot. The central slot is open on one end. It's squared off on the other end. It's about 1 millimeter deep, give or take. It could be a little less, a little more, probably not much less or much more. So 40 thousandths is good. That's 1 millimeter, pretty close. Now,
Michael, how did you make that groove in the shooting block?
okay, well, there's a couple of ways to do it. I've made these for other people where I've done the sensible thing, which was to use a router and route a groove and then carve out, with a chisel, carve out the corners so that I had a nice little slot. I also made one on the milling machine, which means just clamping the piece of wood down and turning the dials until you have the slots to the depth that you want. In this case, I actually took a piece of veneer and I I cut out the slots in it, and then I use double stick tape to stick it down to another piece of wood. That's maybe easier if, in my case, I had the means of making the veneer with a sanding type of a machine that was 40 thousandths thick, and that's what I did. I could go into detail about that. I don't want to spend too much time. There's different ways, but this really works, and you're going to see why. This is an extremely useful thing. We're going to use it for no less than 4 different operations. So the first thing I'm going to do is that my slip, which in this case, and I'm not always completely, I've got this cut to 15.2 millimeters, which for those that care, that's 0.598 of an inch. But millimeters are good. That's what I use most of the time. So I got it to a little over 15 millimeters. And in fact, it's a little bit wide for my slot. I want to be able to drop it into that slot. So, hand plane number 2. This is just a standard low angle, meaning that the blade is at a very low angle rather than being up higher, called the block plane. And I have it sharpened very sharp. I have it set up to a very fine cut. And interestingly, I have what's called camber, which is a little bit of curvature to the blade, so that when I get the center set to a certain height, the edges are actually a little bit lower. I take a smaller bite. And that's useful sometimes, but I won't go into that. So watch this. I'm basically going to take this edge of this, and I'm going to just hold it as close to 90 degrees to the sole that I can, meaning 90 degrees this way, you know what I mean? But here, and I'm going to go like this, and you're going to see that I just made little shavings, right? And the more perfect it gets, it'll go all the way along, and you get the cut. And if you did your work right, you look at the edge of it, you point it up at you, and you look at this corner, and you make sure it doesn't look slanted one way or the other, and that's pretty good. So I might as well, so now I'm at 15, almost 15 exactly. You keep in mind which end was fatter. You give it a few drags across on the fatter end, and then you go full length again. And we're going to go back to this, but right now I'm just giving you sort of a initial demonstration. And so I'm not going to be too critical, but normally I would be, that's good. And it will now fit in the slot, right? Which brings us to plane number 3. And I'm going to give you 2 different little options, or 2 views. These are very similar, although you see this one has kind of what they call a squirrel tail. And that's nice. This is a fairly cheap plane that I've owned for, I think, almost 50 years. I've modified it quite a bit. I've used it a lot. This is one that I acquired, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago or something, 4 or 5 years ago. This is the Ferrari of little planes. This is expensive, and it is perfect. This one has a screw for a tightening the blade. And adjustment pretty much has to be done by fingers and then tapping it with a mallet and another technique which I can show you. But this one has, once you get it parallel to the sole, which you do by sighting it up like with a light through a window or something, and seeing the edge, you look at it like that, you know what I mean? And you see the edge projecting some almost microscopic amount, and you tap it or squeeze it one way or the other with the screw lightened up until it seems parallel to the sole of the plane. Once you achieve that, you can loosen up the screw very slightly, and then not all the way, and then you can either add cut or subtract cut, change the depth of cut, in other words, of the blade. Anyway, planes and plane maintenance is something I'm really into, and we're not going to go into it very far. However, you're going to see that I'm going to use 3 more planes after this process. I'm not going to use this one. I just wanted to show you that something like this can be had for probably 25 bucks, whereas something like this will cost you 100. And there you have it. Now, here's what I'm going to do with this plane. I'm going to hold it down quite firmly, and I'm going to go end to end, a couple swipes, and you'll see that the little chip it's like a little parchment scroll. It's just perfect, and the resulting surface is very good. But once I get it first initially cleaned up, I'm going to go and I'm going to measure it, and I'm at 1.78 millimeters. 1.76 millimeters. That's pretty close. 1/100 of a millimeter is a very small amount. 1/100 of a millimeter is 1/10,000th of an inch, so not too bad. The other thing is, and I'm going to just show you this, if you take on the end and you twist, here, hard to show exactly what I mean. You stick it in your calipers, which are basically going to be very parallel, and you give it a little twist. You're able to see right away if you have a gap on one side and not on the other edge, on one edge, it means you're not quite parallel. And you want it to be parallel, or at least as close as possible to parallel. You can also measure just the edge, 177, 178, that I would call that parallel enough. But I'm going to go down a little bit thinner. And here I go. Once again, establishing your level using the thumb on the front, holding it very firmly, and trying to do this in and I'm applying quite a bit of downward pressure here. I want a really good, clean cut. So, nice. Now we're getting somewhere. 164, 167. I'm going to call that okay. Now I'm going to go back to the width of this slip. And the width right now is 14.31, 14.53. So it's considerably wider here. So I'm just going to take a little bit off. Oh, you know what? Using the wrong one for that. I want this bigger one. And I have a ways to go because I'm going to go down to 12.8 millimeters. Now that number, and a lot of the numbers involved in these things, can vary from one chanter model to the other. But I think if you were reading anything that's like a Rousum chanter, that 12.8 is probably pretty workable. Much wider and you might lose the back D. Narrower and you're going to risk a reed that wants to play sharp. 14.16, 14.16. Well, that's very good, but I still have over a millimeter to go. So I'm going to get aggressive with it. And see what I got that time. I bet it's about 13.8. 13.74. I wasn't too far off. But 13.56. So I'm losing it here and not parallel anymore. And keep track of which edge you've been working on, by the way. When you're doing this, you want to look at this grain and you want to make sure that the grain is as parallel to the edge, at least on one side. It might not be quite the same from end to end. But you want it, in other words, you don't want the grain tilted one way or the other. You want it to be very parallel. I'm not paying a lot of attention to that because this piece happens to be quite parallel. I'm very parallel with the edges now in terms of my width. But I'm going down to 13.33, 13.34. Whoops. Okay, 13.06, 13.05, very close, not worth quibbling about. And now I have to go quite slowly in terms of how much I take off because I don't want to go below 12.8. The truth is, if I went to 12.75, I would still make a read out of it. So I'm at 12.96, 12.93. I'm just going to double check my edges and make sure that I'm maintaining some semblance of squareness. Kind of hard to tell on that edge, but it looks pretty good. Okay, few more cuts here. That will probably do it. 12.82. Oh, 12.74. So I went a little bit farther. 12.72. Okay, not a problem.
Michael, this is Val. You're only planning one edge? Do you switch edges, or is that advisable?
Well, I plane one edge to the point that I am happy with it, with how parallel that edge is with the grain line. And then I switch to the other edge, and it doesn't really matter if I switch them back and forth or not at that point, unless I'm looking at the slip and I'm saying, well, right out towards one edge, the grain gets really wide, and the rest of it is all nice and close together, or even at least. So I might concentrate on the one edge where the grain is wider, and unlike the other 75% or 80% of the width of the slip. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah. So no, that's not, it doesn't really matter. You could switch it around all the time if you wanted. I have one little tweak to do here. 78. Oh, I'm very close, but I'm just going to take a little shaving off here. And that should do it. Now, if you want, and I have to say that I rarely do, you can take this, you can take a block of wood with sandpaper on it. This is like 320 grit, which I wouldn't go any coarser than that. That's plenty coarse. And you can lay it down, and you can refine an edge slightly, but I have no need to do that personally right now, although I occasionally do it. I'm just saying that it's certainly valid. The only thing you have to make sure about that is that the surface that you have your sandpaper on is really flat. You can get on, and this is useful for other things too. You can go to a glass company and see if you can find a piece of plate glass. It will be quite flat. Actually, there's a variety of plate glass that is more expensive than your average plate glass. This is 1/2 inch, by the way. There's a variety that's called float glass. I don't know why it's called that, and I don't know exactly where to get it. I've only read about it, and it's supposed to be guaranteed to be extremely flat. So if anybody happens to ever come across something called float glass, we'll snatch it up because it's the thing. Okay, now the next thing And it's going to involve yet another plane. And let me just say something. I am a plane guy. I really like planes, and I like them for several reasons. One is that I have great control. A lot of people do gouging with a gouge, right? And that's great, but I feel that I have more control with a plane than I do with the gouge. Some people would approach this by putting the gouge, which we're calling that radiused cove cut the length of the slip, calling it the gouge. Some people would do that all by sanding. I hate their standing there breathing a cloud of spruce dust. Not to mention the fact that I also make reeds out of cedar and redwood, both of which give me a scratchy throat and a runny nose. So I don't really want to be breathing the dust. And planes are fast, and instead of dust, you get these wonderful little shavings and no dust at all. So I have some converts, Michael O'Donovan, who, he doesn't have a shop where you can make a mess and just leave it there and don't worry about it on the floor. He's got to kind of keep it all under control. So, and a few other people that have gotten into planes. So the next thing I'm going to do, now I have an option here. I could cut this to length, or I can wait. And I think I'll just go ahead and cut it to length. I could wait until after it's gouged, but why not? Okay, this...
So Michael,
Yes.
you, if I've written down correctly, you recommended like a 1.8 millimeter thickness is what you're going for on that slip.
When you're sawing it, let me just I'll switch back here. When you're sawing it, provided that your saw is not leaving a really ragged kerf line, in other words, a deep saw marks.
Okay.
And when you have planed the surface that's going against the fence when you're sawing, you can get by around 1.8. Maybe, but erring on the fat side.
Okay. Because I'm actually just kind of profiling right now. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can see this. My camera may be a little closer. So I started out with a chunk that looks like this.
I just want to say, is this Preston we're talking to? Who are we talking to?
Dr. Eric Hahn.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're right. So I'd have to find you and switch you on because I've got it pinned on me. I don't know.
And that's fine. So I started out with a big chunk, and I've got it down, and I've got some areas in it, kind of sanding it smooth here, that have come down. The slip's gotten down to like 1.6. Is that going to be too thin, you think, to work? And at 1.35 on one section. Is that going to be too thin for a reed, or?
Well, wait a minute. I'm just. Oh, there you are. Yeah, I wish I knew how to get this to just automatically go to the visual.
Well, sometimes on the right corner it says view.
Yeah.
You can look, I think it's speaker view or gallery view. Would be,
I see. Okay. Well, it says speaker view, but it's not switching.
Yeah, usually speaker view will switch when someone else is talking, but depends on how they have it set up.
All right. Now, run that down again to me. You have a piece of wood.
I started a chunk of wood, like quite thick, that is given to me by a luthier. I have a bunch of them that he gave me. So I kind of just started working it down into a slip. Mm-hmm. And like the finished thickness of that slip, what do you want that to be? Flat. Is 1.8 about where I wanted it, or is it okay if I've gone thinner?
Much thinner would be a problem. You could go, I would say 1.7 is safe. Yeah. And I'll tell you why in a minute. This will become obvious. If you're going to be working down to a center line thickness when you're doing gouging.
Okay.
It's kind of hard in a way to say I'm going to establish the thickness and then bring my gouging perfectly down to the edges.
Okay.
Rather than that, I'm going to depend upon the curvature that is produced by my gouging, which happens to be a plane.
Okay.
And I'm going to measure intermittently as I work. I'm going to measure each end and the center of the center line thickness, maybe even 5 spots, just to make sure I'm staying even.
Okay.
And I want the center line thickness to be a certain number, but we're jumping ahead slightly. So 1.6 will probably work, but I wouldn't want anything thinner than 1.6
Okay.
at this stage.
All right. Cool. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. What kind of what is it? Is it spruce?
Yep. It's spruce from what do you call it? From a luthier friend. I asked him, he got me some bracing scraps.
Do you know what kind of spruce?
I have no clue. The
Okay.
kind that comes from a guy who fixes guitars. So I'm assuming.
Well, there's Sitka spruce, which used to be used a lot for guitar tops. I think it's still sometimes, and it's generally too hard for most reeds. Then there's Engelmann from Canada, and it's generally too soft. There's Adirondack red spruce, which is pretty good, and then there's some spruces from Italy and Switzerland, which are fabulous.
Okay. So what spruce are we looking for then?
For my money, it's the Italian spruce and the Swiss spruce. But I've used some wood. I've used spruce from Canada. There is a kind in Canada that's a hybrid spruce. It's a hybridization of Engelmann and Sitka, or so I'm told. And it apparently has just the right middle ground with those, not too hard, not too soft. And I think it's what a company called Lutz, L-U-T-Z, in Canada had available, but they're going out of business. So as to whether you could get more of that. I'm using spruce mostly from a supplier in Europe named Bachmann, who I think is fabulous.
Okay. Get by like 100 pounds of it or something ridiculous like that?
I think Bachmann is in not 100 pounds, but 100 euros worth.
Okay.
Which would be a few kilograms for sure. I mean, several.
Yeah, I just remember mentioning it. Yeah.
Michael, this idea of Sitka spruce for a very odd reason is something that people really, really researched, and there's various master's and PhD theses on the properties of Sitka spruce because it's what they make the nose cones of the Trident submarine missiles out of. And there must be some special reason because Sitka's way off the coast of Alaska, where it comes from. But it's supposed to be super strong because that's when they're moving the missiles in and out of the submarines, they grab them by the nose cones, which are Sitka spruce. But if people were interested in that, stick in Trident and Sitka spruce, and you can read different theses about its properties.
Right. Well, that's great. I would assume that spruce grows not just on the island of Sitka, don't you think?
I might be wrong. My idea is that it does. Might be wrong.
Okay. Well, that is wonderful information. I'm going to move on, though, to the next step because we're going to run out of time if I don't. But we got a ways to go. Okay? Sound good?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Back to my webcam. Oh, come on. Okay, there we are. All right, now. So I'm going to take my slip. Where is my slip? Is this it? Yeah, I got it 166 or so. And I'm just going to show you, I wanted to tell you that cutting spruce with a knife or a chisel, just simply by pressure, is really problematic. It doesn't really respond quite the way cane does. And that is true of this stage or of when you're trimming reed tips. You can really mess it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark this. I'm going to mark this at 110 millimeters. And I'm going to use this little thing which is called a bench hook. You see the shape of that? It's got a hook to go over the edge of the bench, and it's got a little backstop to hold the work square to and to make it easier to hold it while you saw it. So I'm going to lay that down, and I'm just going to use this little very, very fine bladed handsaw. And you can get these really cheaply. This one was not so cheap, but you can get them from X-Acto, makes some really ultra fine saws that won't last for long if you try to cut metal or something like that, but they'll last a long time if you're cutting spruce. So I'm just going to quickly zip this off. And now I'm at the right length and I don't have to deal with that later. Now, here's the cool thing. This is a violin maker plane. I don't think I showed this to you yet, right? This is a violin maker's plane. It is for carving the archings, especially the hollow parts of the arching along the edges of the soundboard in the top table or soundboard of a violin or a cello or a viola. And I have altered it so that it produces a curvature this way, right here. I've altered that curvature and the blade to produce almost dead on the curvature that I want. And I'll get to what that curvature is in the next step. But right now we're just gonna, this is the equivalent of gouging, but I'm using a hand plane. As I said, I love hand planes. Now this is one that requires that you get the first cut dead down the center, and the next cut will follow the first cut, and etc. So here we go. I've laid it down. I've made sure that the blade seems to be catching the edge, and I am moving along like that, like that, like that, like that. Now you can see that it took a really nice even. Now I have to tell you, I don't like every time I do this unroll the cut and admire it. I'm only doing that for the educational thing. I took a really beautiful little shaving, consistent. It didn't stop, start, it didn't go out and have to go back in, which is what happens a lot with hand gouging. There are people that are really good at hand gouging, especially with an in-canal gouge that you can lay down in the cut. Believe me, you do this by whatever means is suitable to you or you have, and because how you achieve the gouge is not the big deal. It is to me because I happen to be very into hand planes doing this. So that was my second cut. It's now getting close to full width. My third cut, not quite full width, but at this point, I'm going to measure it. And I'm going to measure the center line of the gouge thickness. This becomes quite critical. I'm using a little Mitutoyo caliper. I use it for this job on every reed that I make. And I made one alteration to it, which is that the original end of the little ram that goes against the anvil part of it was flat. And I unscrewed that and I mounted it on the end of something and I ground it by hand to a round profile. So it's like a ball end. You need that because you're dropping it down inside of a curved gouge. So flat wouldn't work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go along. I'm going to measure this. Excuse me. I don't know if you can see that. It says 1.36. I want it to be about 1.2 to 1.15 to 1.2. I'm at 140. I'm at 142. I'm at 144. So I'm a little bit all over the place, but I am not there yet. So I'm going back. Keep it centered. And there might be little weirdnesses at the ends. You wouldn't worry about it too. The ends, by the way, are the least critical because we're going to change those anyway. So I'm at 1.29 I'm at 1.33. I'm at 1.31. So I'm getting pretty close to the ballpark here. One more, probably one more. Whoops. And by the way, I just want to say something. The edges on the inside, this will be the inside of the reed. The edges are fairly delicate. And so it's not uncommon when doing this to drag your thumbnail or fingernail or something along an edge and you find that you've mashed the edge down. If that ever happens to you, don't throw it away. Take a Q-tip, dip it in some water, shake off the excess, and just wipe just that area with water and watch it. It will swell back out and probably go away completely. So anyway, good thing to know, I think. Oh, I want to measure this. So I'm at 1.24, I'm at 1.23, I'm at 1.20. I'm getting very close. At this point, a few swipes on sandpaper would correct it. But I'm going to go one more cut. And by the way, at this point, it doesn't matter that I'm not switching it from end to end. I don't really need to do that. So I'm trying to take one clean cut with enough pressure and steadiness that I get, once again, a completely singular ribbon of shaving. It's perfect. It's rolled up into a little ball. When I was a young guy, I used to write love letters on plane shavings that could be sometimes 4 feet long. One plane shaving, 2 inches wide. Wonderful thing. I think I did that. I wrote love letters on those things. Okay, here we go again. 1.14, 1.16, 1.16. Perfect. Now, that is roughly the smallest that I would want that to be. 1.2 is my actual general target for centerline thickness. But I find sometimes that going a little farther, especially if it is if I feel that this batch of spruce is a little stiffer, I don't think there's any problem with going to 1.15. I wouldn't go below that. So, next step is that I'm going to make a few marks. Now, this is something people have neat little aids, little marking jigs and fixtures for making these marks. I only spend it, I just do it once on a reed. So thing is 110 millimeters long. So I'm going to go to 55 and I'm going to make a mark. And I'm going to go 30 from this end. And I'm going to go 30 from this end, which actually is 80 on the scale. Oops, that didn't work out right. What did I do? Oh, I didn't do 55 in the middle. My mistake. Trying to talk while you're doing this stuff is total distraction. Why are you people bothering me? No, I'm just joking. Okay, so now I'm going to take this little square, which is handy, and you know how to handle these things, and I'll show you the way it works for me. I cradle it in my hand like that. I'm able to put my index finger on the back, or what's left of my index finger, on the back, and hold it against that blade, while this finger holds it against this square, and I take a very fine, soft-leaded mechanical pencil, or whatever you have. But you don't want like a great big, broad, worn out, number 2.
A crayon.
Yeah, right, crayon. And I'm just going to make a line, and I want this to be fairly soft. I don't want to score into the wood. Other end, the same thing. Now this is a reference line for cutting the tails. Even though I'm going to actually end up cutting the tails slightly longer than that, I still am in the habit of doing it. The mark's at 30. The center line, I can make it a little bit deeper. I might as well score it now because it's going to get cut. I just don't want it to kind of wipe away when I'm doing other work. Okay, so now I have the slip with those lines. Like I said, it's 110 millimeters long. I have a mark in the center at 55 millimeters from either end, and I have these marks at 30 millimeters from each end, right? So now, this is a funny little thing, and this is a thing that is kind of personal. There's some people who would probably never do this, and you can make a reed this way, but you'd need different arching if you didn't do this. And what it is, I'm just going to show you rather than, well, okay, here's a slip that I prepared a couple days ago. Can you see that there is a secondary gouge which starts right about there?
Yes.
You can see that in the light?
Yes.
Okay. So what that is that's going to reduce from just above the line for the tails, going in kind of at an angle and then getting parallel. That's going to reduce this center line thickness from there out to the end of the tails to down around 0.9 millimeters. So if you were at 1.2, you're going to go to a depth of about 3.3 millimeters. On the other hand, it's more the center line thickness that I'm concerned with. I'm not really every time figuring out the actual differential between those two measurements. And you can do it one of two ways. Let's see, I got to find the right tool. Right. The old kind of way to do that is with a number 4 sweep, 3/8 of an inch wide or 10 millimeters. It's a carving gouge, and you want it deadly sharp, and it's called the sweep is the curvature of it, and it is a number 4. That's I think a European designation. I'm sure it is originally, but people use those designations. And so what you're going to do, and this is a kind of a hard bit of work, but you're going to start up maybe a quarter of an inch or a little less. So let's call it 5 millimeters or so towards the center from that 30 millimeter line, the line of the tails. And you're going to go in and you're going to attempt to make one clean swipe out to the end. Harder to do than with a plane. And then the thing about it is you pretty much have to measure every cut, which doesn't take very long. Okay, so I'm at 0.88, and then you measure it like in 3 different places. 0.91, 0.90. That would be perfect for me. Then I'm going to take that, and I'm glad it went well. They don't always go so well. I'm going to take that gouged thing, and I'm going to lay it over a cylinder of wood or whatever you have. If you're a bagpipe maker, you have a lot of cylinders of wood hanging all over, laying all over your shop. This thing is, basically 7/8 of an inch or a little more outside diameter, 23 millimeters, let's call it. And it's got 320 grit on it, and I'm gonna take that gouge thing, and I'm gonna put my finger right opposite right opposite the 30 millimeter line. I'm gonna put my finger there. That way, when I turn it over, I know where that line is, because I don't want to be sanding farther up into the gouge.
Hey, Mike, Mike, sorry. Before you get going, your video is stalled out there for a second. Let's just give it a second to buffer up. All right, you're good to go.
Okay, I wonder why that happened. Some little hiccup in the internet connection, probably.
I think so.
Other than that, it's
doing it again, actually. Oh, you're good.
It did it again? Okay, well, you get the idea. I've just blended the cut a little bit. It's less important when you do it really cleanly, but it's not always easy to do cleanly. So I'm going to show you something cool that I started using recently. This is another little plane, and it came with a curved sole and a curved blade, but it was only curved in one direction, and I found that difficult to hold down. I like a curve in both directions, mild curve this way, and the curve I want this way is I want to kind of match the number 4 sweep of my gouge. And I've been using that. So I'm going to put that down. I'm going to go right down there. Boy, that is really good. It's easy and it's really smooth and consistent. Gouging is very difficult to keep the depth exactly the same as you progress. On a plane, on the other hand, it's kind of built-in feature that that just does that. Okay, so yeah, that was really good. Now, that one is so good that I don't even feel like I need to sand it, right? So what I'm going to do now, and this is an interesting little thing, and that's what this open-sided slot is all about. And if you're making flat reeds, this slot is too wide, in which case I drop in a little shim that I hold in place with a piece of tape. On later ones, I had it where you could turn the whole thing around and have slots that were designed for flat reeds, reeds that were more like 10.5 to maybe 11 millimeters. So here's what you're going to do. You now have the gouge, the secondary gouge, I call it. That is for the staple. And you're going to turn it over, and the other side you're kind of wondering about because it's still flat and square and kind of rectangular. Now this is a cool thing. So I'm going to put it in that slot. It's not supported in the middle, but I'm going to be using such light pressure that it doesn't really have to be. I'm going to go back to my small plane, this one, and I'm going to set this over at, I'm guessing it's like about 10 degrees or 15 degrees or something like that, and I'm going to start to make a cut like that, like that, like that, and you will see it looks like you're hardly cutting at all at first, but now you do it 5 times and all of a sudden you're getting a nice, every cut it gets wider. And so I don't know if you can see. Yes, you can see. You see the bevel? Right. And now what I'm going to pay attention to is I'm going to pay attention to this bevel, and I'm going to make sure that it doesn't go more than a third of the way across. I was holding, yeah. That it doesn't go more than, it's really hard, of a third away across the width. I'm also going to pay attention to the edge out here. I don't want it paper thin. I don't want it as thin as you often would make it if you were making a cane reed, because it doesn't have barks supporting it like on a cane reed. So I want it to be, well, I'll measure it when I'm done. And I do it by eye, but it's going to be less than a millimeter, but not a lot less. And you might need to adjust the angle that you hold the plane at, just to make sure that you're coming up with a bevel. I still go ways to go here. If I weren't talking, this would be a lot faster, of course. But it's smooth and you have a lot of control, and I've never seen any ill effects from this. I haven't destroyed a reed or anything like that. Now, that's about right. So I'm about a third of the way across with my bevel, and my edge, just so that you'll know what I just eyeballed to, my edge is about 0.8 millimeter, or maybe 0.84, 82, so something like that. So in other words, less than a millimeter. It's probably about a 32nd of an inch if you like that kind of a system. And then I'm going to do the other edge. And you're always working now, when you're doing stuff like this, you're always working for symmetry. You'd like the two edges to be pretty much similar. But interestingly, unlike cane, you can work the outside of a spruce reed in any part of the outside of a spruce reed. In cane, it's kind of not really cool to start carving away all of the bark all the way out to the edges, but you can reduce the edges in a spruce reed, and you won't change the nature of the material at all. Okay, so then if you want, but it's not necessary, you can go back and remove just the peak of those 3 facets, those 2 peaks which then means you're approaching a sort of cylindrical shape a little bit more. I don't think it's necessary. So I just did it just to show you. Okay, so now I have a slip. It's rounded on the outside, or at least faceted. The edges are, maybe 0.75, 0.8 millimeter, something like that. I wouldn't go a lot thinner than that. I think you could go a little bit thinner. I wouldn't go thicker either. I think 1 millimeter is probably too thick. My center line's all been controlled. I have the gouge, I have the secondary gouge, I have the marks. I'm now going to cut the tails. And before I cut the tails, I'm going to go back and make my little pencil mark, my pencil marks a little bit bolder because you can't see them. And the way I cut the tails, I can't see when I turn it one way because I'm always cutting from this side. And when I turn it that way, I can't see. So I transfer the pencil mark around on just the one edge. You would discover which edge that was if you did it. I'm not going to elaborate. And I'm going to get back into planes in a minute, which is kind of fun. I'm going to introduce plane number 4. Won't that be exciting? Okay, very sharp knife. I have several different knives. I try to keep them all really sharp. And some people don't like this idea. This works for me. I never cut myself. There's hardly any pressure involved. The stuff slices like butter. So, oh, I forgot one step. This is a kind of a handy little thing. This is just a little antique compass, right? With a pencil lead, a soft pencil lead. And I can, by eyeball, set this up where when I hold the needle part of it against the edge, it's more or less in the middle, right? So if I make a mark, and then I turn it around to the other side and I make another mark, it doesn't matter if it's in the middle because the center between those two marks that happen to be slightly apart is the center. And I do that on all of the surfaces, all of the both ends, and I do it outside too because I'm going to be flipping this thing around when I carve the tails. Okay, so I'm very going to quickly just skive off from the mark. Well, my first cut will be this side of the mark, not right at the mark. And I'm never going to come down to a sharp point. The spruce is a little bit too delicate for that. It really doesn't make any sense to try to bring it to a complete point. I'm going to leave a width at the bottom that is maybe 3/32 of an inch, which would be a little less than 2 millimeters. No, a little more than 2 millimeters. So here I go, and I'm just going to take this down. It's not going to be perfect. I don't care, and you're going to see why in a minute. That's close. I do the same thing here, and here, and here. Okay. I still have my center line. Do the other end. Oh, a little deep on that one. I'm trying to look kind of cavalier and, live dangerously here. But here's the cool thing. I'm going to take this plane again, and I'm going to lay this down. Now, it's funny that I do it this way, and you might think it's a little bit redundant, but I'm going to plane it flat first. That way I can make sure that I have all the geometry just the way I want it. And then I'm going to introduce a curvature to give myself a slightly bottle-shaped tails. Okay? And I'm also going to do that with a plane. So here I go. I'm just going to start planing. Look at it. Okay, I'm the perfect distance here. I like to plane a little bit past my 30 millimeter mark. I should probably start putting a mark at 33 millimeters, but I just like to do it because I know that I'm going to be narrowing the shoulders of the blade later on. So I've gone now, what I think maybe 2.5, 3 millimeters past. And now I'm going to do the other side. And when I do the other side, I'm going to constantly be holding it up and making sure that it looks really symmetrical. And when you're planing, you can plane more on the tip or more on this, that I call it the heel, to correct the angle. But I'm pretty much there, so I don't really have to do anything. I'm going to take one little shave off there. The other end, whack, 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 whack. And, okay, and this side. You could, if you're not talking, I know this from experience, you can actually make incredible headway with these, with this technique with the hand planes. And the nice thing about it is if you take this edge down with a hand plane, boy, it's going to be flat. It's not going to be ragged. You don't have to spend a bunch of time trying to carve a perfectly straight line. Okay, having done that, I'm going to switch to a funny little plane that I made back in the 70s when I was first making stringed instruments. And it's a plane that has an arch only in one direction. And it's flat across this way. It has a blade made from an old file. It has a wedge that keeps it in place. And I haven't used it for years for hardly anything, but I find it really handy for this. Now watch, I'm going to take between this point here, or the line really, and the tail, or pretty close to the end of the tail, I'm going to just take this and I'm going to just create this little curvature. And the cool thing about it is it wants to make an even curvature. It can't dig in one spot and skip over the top on the other spot. So it's nice in that respect. Really, you could do a lot of these things any old way that works for you or is accessible to you because of what tooling you have. I just happen to have the way that I do it, and so that's what I'm showing you. You could also you can carve it and then you can refine it with a curved sanding block like that, where you lay it on the sanding block. This has different curvatures along the length of it, as you can see. So I could make a more acute, tighter curve or a more shallow curve. But I'm going to do it with this tool. Once again, try not to really point the tails. When you're doing this part, you don't want to take anything off the very end of the tail. You just want to get to it or close to it. Okay, so having done that, the next thing I need to do is to bevel. I'm going to use this tool again. You could do it with a knife. If you do it with a knife, let's see, I'll take this knife. If you do it with a knife, I do it once again like this, carefully. I have a lot of control with my thumbs sort of acting as an anchor, but I can do it like this. I don't even have to pay attention because I just know that it's doing the right thing. It's kind of incredible that way. Okay, so, and the beveling is just, it makes a cleaner wrap. It probably reduces the edge tension and evens it out a little bit more. It probably allows the wrap to close down better and not have gaps underneath it, like you will sometimes have along the sides of the reed. Now, that's basically it. And we're going to move on to cutting this apart and tying it up. And then we're going to move on to some other reeds that I tied up yesterday, and you will get the reason for that. So here's what I do. As I said before, spruce doesn't like to be just, you couldn't put this on like a round platen and sit there and lever through it with your knife. You could, but frankly, it would be, potentially it would crush fibers. Spruce is relatively soft. But what you can do is take a sharp single-edged razor blade, go along your center cut, your center line, and just, without a lot of pressure, just score it. Don't go all the way to the end, this direction, because you don't want to snap out a little fibers. Just turn it around and start at the other corner and then meet the line that you just cut and deepen it a little bit. Then I take one of the blocks. I have millions of these different. They were originally for experiments for trying different gouging sanding blocks. So this is 90 millimeter diameter block cut in half, made on a lathe. Look at that! It's some kind of a beautiful maple, isn't it? And I'm just going to set that down. Oh, you have to transfer the line and the subsequent cut that you made with the razor blade to the other side. You can do that with a pencil, and it's a little bit hard, and it gets out of line, and it doesn't matter. You're going to be trimming the reed anyway. But watch this. You just take your razor blade, and you just lightly touch the wood and drag it along, and when you get to the cut that you just made, it drops in, and then you just walk it around, and it leaves a little visible line on the edge. And that way, when you make the top cut, that you're going to be pretty much right there. Oh, I'm being visited. Okay. So now, having done that, I'm going to lay it down on this block. I'm going to line up my blade so that it will contact by rocking all the way across, and I'm going to rock it back and forth a few times until it separates. And it did, and it's quite clean. I mean, there's a little bit of a burr in one spot. Not a problem at all. And now I'm going to get ready to tie this up.
Michael,
Yes.
this is Phil. What kind of dip are you measuring right now when you put the two together?
Dip? You mean what is the opening at the tip?
Yes. Yeah.
I don't really measure that so much. I'm relying on the curvature that I want. Oh, something I never did on this reed, but it really doesn't matter because I don't ultimately have to do it, is that I often will take. I kind of jumped beyond past. I should have talked about this. I got ahead of myself. I will take a. Oh, here. This is a sanding block. It happens to be that it goes into this base. All of my sanding blocks fit in this base. I put the base. I'm going to do this for you, just because you need to know. What time is it anyway? Oh, we're doing pretty good. Yeah, we're good. Switching back to FaceTime. Okay. Here's an articulating vise that I'm mounting here. Move this so that you can see it. Then this block could easily just sit on the bench. It could go down with double stick tape, Velcro. You can screw it from the bottom, whatever. I happen to have created this weird little device where I clamp in my wonderful Italian bench vise. I clamp this block, and the block has little spring détentes. They don't actually mate into any holes, but I'm able to take a block like this. In this case, the block has 2 grits of sandpaper, 320 and 400. I rarely use anything coarser than 320. Maybe 280 would be all right. Anyway, I push it in here. I push it and it drops down in. And now I have the means of getting this into a comfortable position, however I want, that works for me. And I would take a gouged slip such as this one, which I've already sanded. But I prepared a bunch of slips to varying degrees. And after I gouged it with the plane, I would lay it on here, and I would do a little bit of sanding. However, this, by the way, is 105 millimeter diameter cylinder. really big. And people say, wow, that's nothing like, everybody's using like a 70 millimeter cylinder. They say, what do you use? Well, I use a Coke can. Well, that's really accurate. But anyway, 105 millimeters, because what we are attempting to do is to make reeds that are absolutely relaxed, that are basically at about the right tip opening without any pressure from a collar or a bridle. Makoto in Japan likes to make his reeds actually on a bigger cylinder and to make them so that the tip opening is almost closed. That's the way he prefers it. Whereas I think myself and Michael O'Donovan, both of us, we like it the opposite. We want our tip opening to be just slightly more open. Was an interesting thing. In other respects, we're doing very, very similar technique of reed making. I'm using a cylinder of a diameter of 105 millimeters. 100 millimeters works great. I could talk about how to make those things without a lathe. I don't think I'll get around to it because, but I'm always available, for that kind of information. By the way, I think I'm going to actually post some YouTube videos sometimes in the coming months, more in depth on different aspects of this thing. So basically, the way I'm doing it with the curvature of this little plane, where are we, being what it is, I come out with just about the perfect curvature. And the amount of time that I'm spending sanding is nil. I mean, it is like literally 30, 40 seconds and I'm done. I'm only sanding it kind of to make sure, to just double check. Am I a little deep here? Are the edges a little thick here? Do I have a little discontinuity? I don't. It's just the way it is. So the amount of sanding I do is very minimal, and I like it like that. So, there you have that. I'm going to go back to tying a reed because that's the next thing we need to do. And for that,
while you're doing that, did you ever mention the radius for the violin scraper that you were using? Not a scraper, but plane. You said that you were going to talk more about that radius later. Was that when you were? I don't remember hearing about it.
For me, that radius matches this sanding block. So the radius of this is actually 52.5 millimeters. It's probably a little bit more with the sandpaper on it. This was originally about 100 millimeter block round, which I skived the edges off from. And I wanted it to be slightly larger, and rather than making a whole new block, I couldn't put my hands on a chunk of wood that was big enough. I just took some plastic and heat bent it to the right curve, and it was quite flexible, and I took 2 layers of it, which happened to work out to be just the right amount to add another 2.5 millimeters to the surface, bringing it to a radius of 52.5 or a diameter of 105. So the curvature, it's interesting, the curvature of a plane like this is a little more dependent on the blade than it is on the actual sole. I would say you want the sole to be as close as possible, but I have the blade sharpened in such a way that it projects a little deeper in the middle than it does along the edges. So obviously my curvature is a little bit shallow. But the blade, yeah, it's a bunch of tweaking, but you use this so seldom and you're not using it in very abrasive materials. So it stays sharp for a long time. It doesn't need like regrinding. I mean, you just touch up sharpening every once in a while. So basically, I've got it set up to produce the curvature, which is why I sometimes make reeds without sanding at all, which I love. I love that. I don't sand. I was just going to show you, get out the little box. This is a smaller, where'd the plane go? So here you have the two. And the small one is for flat reeds. Now, I've had these for years, and I didn't buy them for this purpose. When I also altered them, I put the little frog with the screw in it. It had a wooden wedge, which was a pain in the butt to set up, and the wedge would loosen up in the dry weather, and you'd pick it up to use it, and the blade would fall out or whatever. Horrible, because the setup time can be really, the setup, it's not a huge amount of time, but it's a very painstaking thing to get them set up just the way you want them. And so I put in the screwed wedge, steel wedge in both of these. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Perfectly. Thank you.
Good. I'm going to move along because I want to get a reed tied up, and we're getting kind of close here. So I have, let me go back to the other camera. Much better, at least for this segment. Epic Cam. Oh, where is it? I don't know what happened. Wait a minute, you have to bear with me. It looks like it should be working. Maybe I didn't pick the right one. Oh, there. Okay. I'm getting rid of this. Here we are, our two little slips, delicate little things that they are. And I'm going to stick them together. Pretty standard sort of a thing. I'm going to use regular unscented waxed dental floss. You can get the flavor of your choice. And I'm going to pull off about 16 inches, 18 inches of it or so. Rather have too much than not enough. I'm going to hold these things together, capture the thread under my thumb till I get it started. And I'm going to wrap down, maybe about 16 millimeters, 5/8 of an inch or something like that. Come back towards the tip, not a lot of pressure. And when I get where I have about that much left, I do one of those whip overhand things where you just make a loop, turn it, stick it over the end, pull. And then whatever's left over, I can cut it off. Or if it's just a little bit, I just plaster it down to the wax. Now there I have that. Now I'm going to take a staple. Now, I know that a lot needs to be said about staples, but that is kind of, in a way, the same as it is in other reed making, and that information is available. And it doesn't set this method apart from cane reeds. It's the same. And staples vary from one chanter to the other by different makers, sometimes even by the same maker, sad to say. Let's see here. Oh, yes. So, what we've been making so far is a staple that I actually make out of 5 millimeter brass tubing that I have expanded using a mandrel that I drive in with an arbor press and then pushing it out the other end, and I end up with you have to anneal it to do that. You don't anneal the whole thing, you just anneal what's going to be the fat or bottom end. And then I also have a thing which I should show you just because it's kind of cool. So, oh, look at that. I have two of them. So when I do staple eyes, and this is true on hand-rolled staples, which I also make, and on silver soldered hand-rolled seams or ones that are left unsoldered, it doesn't matter. I have special pliers that I made that have a 3/16 radius curvature, in other words, like a cylinder of 3/8. And here's my swedged staple blank. There it is. And I put it in here like this, and I put in a flattened eye-forming mandrel, and I put that mandrel right flush to the end because that limits the bend. And I make sure it's well centered. And I crank that sucker. And I end up with a fairly, pretty much just about what I want in the shape of, you know, it's basically a very nice football shape. I might flatten it slightly, but if you flatten a staple, and that's a copper rolled one or tubing, if you flatten it with a pair of flat blade pliers, you'll pinch the center in more than the rest of it, and you'll end up with this almost figure-8 shape. And then you have to straighten that out. It's more work. So I get the initial bend with those pliers. Okay, so I'm going to take this. I'm going to tie this reed on a used copper staple that I rolled a while back, and the reed died. This is actually for my Crowley chanter, but basically it uses the same techniques all the way through and the same numbers other than the staple. Then really the difference is in how you finish it. They come to life in a slightly different way. And but nothing else is really different about that. So I'm going to put this in here just as a dry run, and I'm going to measure it, and I want it to be about 85, 84 millimeters assembled length. I'm going to go for 85. I'll probably chop it back. I find that a lot of my reeds when I'm finished are 83, sometimes 82, but 83 seems to work for me a lot in my dechanter, mostly in my Rousum, which is the one that I mostly make reeds for these days. And I'm just, as a reference, although this is not necessary, I'm going to take a marker if I can find it. Where are you? Well, I'm not, because I can't find it. That's all right. Here's the deal. If I tie this up dry, I will have to wrap it partway, let it sit, unwrap it partway, wrap it a little farther, let it sit, unwrap it partway back, wrap it a little farther, and do that in successive moves, and then I still might split it, because they're very prone to split. However, if I take a little water and I dip the tails in no higher than that 30 millimeter mark or thereabouts, in other words, not even up to the shoulder here, but just down about here. I dip it in, I take it out, and I shake it off because it'll hold water in there like the nibs of a fountain pen. And then I tie it up. I can tie it up from end to end, zip, just bang, and it won't crack. I'm also going to tie it up with a temporary wrap, just to get it to take shape and to close. And then I'm going to let it dry, which is the reason why I can't finish this reed in front of your eyes today. I have to finish one of the 2 reeds that I made yesterday because they're dry, right? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to tie it up. And this is like no special kind of tying. This is really fast. Unlike the final wrap, which is going to be very carefully done. The main thing I want to do is to get it on there, have it take shape. And so it's wet now. I'm putting the staple in. I'm going to measure it again. Got to go further in. Okay. I'm at 84. I'm going to pull it out ever so slightly. I'm going to sight down it. Here. Well, you just have to use your imagination because you can't see my eye. I'm holding this pointing way away from me where I can sort of sight down it, as if you were sighting the fretboard of a guitar to see if it was straight or whatever. And I'm making adjustments so it's not only straight, but so that it's symmetrically inserted, so that it is in the middle. And moving it around a little bit, sometimes it'll work its way off the staples. So I'm also going to, without disturbing what I just did, I'm also going to double check, and I'm still at just about 85 millimeters. I like that. Okay, I'm going to take my, where did it go? Oh, I can't find it. My 18 inches of, oh, that was for something else. No, this I'm going to use dental tape rather than dental floss. Dental tape is just like the same thing, but it's about 3 times thicker, and I use it for wrapping reeds. And I'm going to take about arm length to the opposite shoulder. Get it trapped under your thumbnail. Get a wrap until it locks on itself. Then catch the tails like that. Then double check, sight it so that you're still maintaining that it's square and flat with itself, and it looks good to me. And I'm wrapping, I'm leaving a little space because that'll help it dry. I don't really, it doesn't matter. I don't need this to be leak proof. But it's really great that you can wrap a reed like this after having just wet the tails and have it not crack. I will say it's very important to not wet the tails more. You have to only go into just the tails, and then you have to pull it out right away, because if you don't, it'll it'll meander up through the cellular structure, and it will saturate the reed farther up, and it will change the arching. And you may find that you then have a reed that has basically closed down in the drying process, and that's not what you want at all. So I'm just basically going up until I get this to close. I'm turning it 180 degrees, and I'm watching the edge and then applying pressure. It's not hugely tight, but I want it to close. I don't want some spruce is so soft it'll really dig into the edges. I don't like that at all. And now once I get it like that, I'll take a few wraps up high and then spiral down fairly quick towards the bottom, and then I'll make my little lock loop and put it over the end, and then I have a reed. And sometimes, if this is long enough, I put a loop in it and I hang it in a nail behind my wood stove where it gets nice and warm. And it'll sit there and wave in the moving air, and it'll dry like twice as fast. Okay, we're going to set that aside because that one has to dry, and I'm going to move on to this one. This one says B2, which means it's of a certain batch of Bachmann European spruce, maybe Italian, maybe Swiss, I'm not sure, but wonderful stuff. And I am going to get ready to unwrap this and then wrap it. When I do that, I'm going to move to the other computer because, the other scene, because I can't get my little, there, right. So here we are. And I use a reed winder. This is kind of a fun little one. I made it up some years ago. I've been always happy to have it. Little brass crank and a little, actually antique walrus, the little knob. And it has a collet chuck. It has a collet chuck out of a dead battery-operated Dremel. So you can open the collet and pull out the mandrel and put different size mandrels to suit different staples, which is very handy if you're making flat reeds. You need a different mandrel to hold the reed. So get that really tight. Put it in the vise.
That's a 1/8 inch diameter collet.
The collet is 1/8 inch. The actual piece, the rod itself, was made out of 3/16, been turned down to a slight taper and then flattened. with a file
Mhm.
to so that it goes into the eye and holds its place there. The collet is 1/8. It's a standard collet that comes with those little cheap Dremels. These Dremels are handy, but if you ever have the battery wear out and you need to replace it, the battery costs 3 times the amount of a new one. So what the heck? Okay. So let me see if I have some. I might have to wax. Oh, I have a little bit here. I use dental floss for dental tape for wrapping reeds. And I have, I think, just about enough pre-waxed that I'm just going to go ahead and use it rather than spend the time. And I just want to say something about this, about reeds in general. When I first learned to make reeds, people would coat the outside of the wrap with glue, or varnish, or shellac, or whatever. In other words, they figured, that's it, man, I'm done with this reed. But the truth is, one of the most powerful things that you can learn how to do and make part of your technique is to take reeds apart. Because it's incredible. Say you have a reed and the octaves are not great. Well, guess what? If you pull the staple out, you can correct that a little bit. You can widen the octaves a little bit, get a little more volume right above the eye. Or you have a reed and it plays beautifully, but it's just generally too sharp. And if you try wrapping it so that you only have a little bit of it stuck in, it's just ready to fall out all the time. So you take the reed apart, you move the staple out. There's other reasons to take reeds apart too. And it's like you should embrace that as a common technique that's very helpful. Okay, so I'm going to take this reed that I just showed you, that was the one that dried from yesterday, and I'm just basically going to pull all the wrap off. And once I get down near the tail here, I'm going to hold it quite carefully because I don't want it to slip necessarily. However, there is a chance that I might make an adjustment with the staple, like move it in or out. But in this case, I don't think I'm going to. So I'm holding it, pinching it by the reed tails against that. And I'm going to take my dental tape, which has black wax supplied by the man himself, Ted Anderson, who I think is lurking in there somewhere. And I'm going to just hold it under my thumbnail, get it around until I can capture it, and then I can pull it tight. And I'm going to start wrapping this, being very careful to not stress out the head here. In other words, I don't want to just grab it by the head. I want to grab over where the staple is. And I'm going to.
You might move your camera down a little because we can only see your head.
Oh man, well, my head's nice. Okay, so
you're right. Move it back up again.
No, so I'm just wrapping it on, and you want to pay attention to what direction you're wrapping it because this is going to get turned around when I put it on the winder, and so it would wind. And I like it to wind from the side towards me. In other words, instead of going up behind, I just like to see that. It doesn't really matter, but you will encounter that. So get it part of the way up. Give it a little tug, we want it snug. We want that stuff to be right up against each other or overlapping. And when you actually get onto this winder, which I'm going to do now, when you get onto the winder, and I have to have some light on this subject, so this light's probably going to wipe out your, there, that's probably not too bad. That's okay. So, boy, okay. as you wrap, if you just running it through your fingers, it'll flatten out. At which point, as you progress, you start laying it, overlapping it a little bit, which ensures that you're going to have a serious
Air seal.
seal, yeah, an air seal. And now I'm distracted because I have to find my visor, which I just had a little while ago, but I took off. Oh, here it is. Great. Okay.
Michael, this is just amazing. I'm really enjoying this.
Pretty ridiculous. I'm glad you are. Okay, so I like to have the thing just at eye level so that I can really see what I'm doing. And if you don't do it right, you sometimes get the blades will shift. And that's hard to kind of counteract after the fact. So I recommend when you get up a little ways here, well, I'll show you. So I'm going to just wrap, whoops, this has got to be tighter. Okay, I'm going to wrap, use my thumbnail to flatten this stuff out. It's going on good. By the way, I would also have better lighting for this and not so much, other light. But I don't have that because it would wipe out the whole video thing. So as I get up here, I'm gonna be, this is working out pretty well, but sometimes I will go around one side and then around the other side, and with the side pointing straight up, I will give it a little tug to put the tightness on. Then I'll go half a turn, do the same. And in so doing it, I think it counteracts the desire for the blade to shift. Nonetheless, I'm just going to go straight on here. I'm going to take it off for a minute. I'm going to look through the gap which still exists on a measure because I didn't make a mark. I want to know where the end of the staple is. You'll find it odd. Okay, so I'm like right at the end of the staple now. But you'll find it a little bit odd that there are certain aspects of this that I do really by eyeball and by feel. And one of those is I don't really like measure exactly where I'm going to stop the wrap. I don't do that. I do it a bit by feel. And it also depends on how far I've put the staple in. But I'm always going to be past the end of the staple to some degree. And sometimes actually quite a bit past the end of the staple. But I don't want to go way up onto the shoulders of the reed, the wide part of the reed, because I just don't want to. But right now, I'm going to go, so I'll just tell you, I'm completely closed. It opened up a little bit, again, when you took the wrap off, the preliminary wrap off. But it's completely closed now. I'm just going to go a few more turns. So I can tell you, let me just stabilize this. Now I'm going back down and I'm going to keep overlapping. Tight overlapping. And I also want to reduce the pressure in the area just below the end of the staple eye and however far I wrap above it. Actually kind of decreasing the pressure as I go along. Obviously you have to have enough pressure to close the reed, but at that point you don't want to stress the reed out. You don't want to impose internal stresses in the reed. So the part that's really going to hold it on is the staple interface below that point, and then you can lay into it a little bit. And I'm just going to tell you how far I went. This will be just a reference. It really doesn't work out this way all the time. So I'm at about 56 millimeters, which means I'm 3 millimeters past the end of the staple, because the staple is 53 millimeters. Bit of a long staple, but not too long. And I'm just going to tell you that my blades, my overall blade length right now is about 28 plus millimeters. And it's going to, of course, get chopped back. But to my eye, it's looking like a reed, so that's encouraging. Okay, so now I am actually going to go real fast, but I'm maintaining the tightness, in other words, overlapping or at least right tight up against each other. And I'm giving it a pretty good amount of pressure because I don't want it to slip. I mean, I've seen people have their reeds fall apart in their hands when they were trying to take them out of the chanter. I think, you know, something wrong there. Okay, so one of the things nice about, by the way, about a reed winder is that it doesn't keep twisting this. It goes on without adding more twist to it. Because the more twist you put in it, the tighter it becomes a round little twisted thing that won't flatten out and you can't really overlap it. Anyway, just an observation. I'm going to go down some distance, actually pretty close to the end. Oh, my collet slipped. And this is a seamless, you know, tubing staple, so I don't have to worry too much at all about it sealing right there. And I would normally have a little more of this black waxed, but I don't, and that's fine. And if you have black wax on it, and I'm going to do it this way anyway, you don't need to tie a knot. I bring it up, and then I cut it off, and then I lay it down, pointing upwards, not straight across. That way I can always find the end and get it if I want to take the reed apart. So, now I have that. And there it is. Now I'm going to work on this reed without putting a wire on it. I use wire instead of brass collars most of the time. Brass collars are great if you have reeds that are wildly open that need to be closed down a lot, but I don't make reeds that way. And I like wire bridles. You know, this, I will say spruce, wire bridles are probably better for spruce reeds. Putting a flat copper bridle on a spruce reed, you can damage the reed quite easily. Okay, let's get this lash up out of the way. And, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of 3 or 4 different knives that I have lying around here. I think I will use this. Where did you go? This one. Now, I'm just going to say this. Some people have, you know, you can go out and buy a template that shows you the shape of a scrape. I'm not going to buy one. And you're welcome to. But I think it's less of a thing with a spruce reed, partly because you can't see the scrape in the same way. And you might work on areas outside what we would call the scrape. Basically, it's still a roughly V to slightly U-shaped scrape. But I'm going to go in an area that is maybe 3/4 of the way towards the tip, or maybe 2/3. If you see my little mark, about there. And I'm going to carve it away with a knife, simply because I can do that really fast. And it won't be like absolutely even and perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But then I will go to sanding, and I have less sanding to do that way. So,
Could you move the camera down again?
what?
Move the camera down again?
Oh, well, right. I should do this under the other camera. I will be more comfortable. I'll be able to see it better. This one, and you'll be able to see it better. So I'm going to switch again. Okay?
So, Michael, no one told you this, but you have to do Piper's chair with this reed you've just finished now.
We'll have to see. We'll have to see.
With the pipes as well?
I will say this. It would be a reed I made, one way or the other, but it might not be this one. And I'll get into that a little bit right now, because you can get a reed to sound in a matter of minutes at this point. But as to whether you can get a reed playing the way you want it, it might take several little sessions over the period of several days, and you can't really expect to rush it through that process. They come around when they come around, and a lot of times the ones that want to speak earliest on aren't necessarily the best reads. Let me go to the other camera, and that other thing is going to start pretty soon, isn't it? Okay.
Whenever you're finished.
Right. Now you can see that no problem, right? Here I go. I'm going to make a cut from up there on the shoulder, right down the middle. It'll get a little bit wider as I go down, but I'm not too concerned about that. Then I'm going to go from the middle and then towards one side. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. You really have to be careful. You don't want to take too much. But just getting that initial bulk off from there is, with a knife, is more agreeable. And you kind of establish a kind of a flat area before you start sanding. Okay, and then I'm going to take and I'm going to lay this thing down on here. I'm going to be careful. I don't have a bridle on it yet, and I don't want to abrade the wrap, right? So I'm going to be kind of careful about that wrap. And at first, you can go sideways, which removes material faster because you're going across the grain. And you can see the shape of it.
And Mike, is this your 320 block?
My first what?
Is this your 320 grit block?
This is, what I'm using right now is somewhat worn, about 280.
Okay.
And then I think the 320 is on the other side. I don't usually use anything much coarser than that. Spruce sands down pretty quickly. So let's see. Let me move my monitor so I can see. All right. So yeah, you can see that I'm getting a sort of a pointy U-shaped thing, and I am up near the bridle, but I don't want to touch the wrap. In fact, I'm probably slightly under where the bridle is going to be, and that is just fine. And I haven't done this side yet, but here we go. And the tips I'm left, they're still quite thick at this point. Actually, I'm going to take a little bit more off that first side first. And at some point, I pretty much switched to back and forth and no side to side. I would say that I don't even always use the side to side sanding. Okay, side two. A little bit of side to side. And you kind of find yourself moving your finger around, you know, so that you're spreading the pressure out into the areas that you think need it, and you keep looking at it. And there's no way to kind of describe it other than to say you do it enough times and you will get a sense for it. And here's the deal. Reed making is like some other things that I can think of. Like, I knew a guy who was considered one of the great fly tyers for fishing. And he was more into tying flies than he was into fishing, by a long shot. And I said, how did you get so good? He says, I do it all the time. And I think that's not necessarily the way it has to work, but it goes a long way. That you put an energy in and you do repetitions, you know. So we're getting very close, and you don't want to go too thin. We'll save that for later, kind of tuning the reed up. I'm going to test this reed right about now. And I'll just give you a little view. Looks kind of nice. And you'll notice something about it because of the thicknesses of that I left the edges of the slip. There's this, they're pretty fat looking. And then they taper down starting at about here where the scrape intersects the edge. They taper down. Sometimes later in the development of a reed, you might want to thin those edges or blend that so it doesn't have that little hump between the fat part and where it starts to taper. However, I actually think leaving the rails, I call them rails because it's like saxophone clarinet terminology, leaving the rails sort of thick like that initially, you can impart a certain stability to a reed that I think you can easily lose if you go too thin. So let's see what it does. Let's see if it crows. You want to make bets on this? Ready?
I bet it will.
A little bit too strong. And now I'm just going to give you a couple little pointers. I don't know if we'll get there right now because we're actually beyond our time, aren't we? So here's the deal. When you're working on reeds, this is cane reeds, spruce reeds, it doesn't matter. You work on it, you get it crowing, you get it playing, it's too strong, but you're saying to yourself, God damn, the thing is playing really sharp. Well, guess what? As you work it, there's a point when it's going to fall. It's going to drop in pitch. It's going to come down in pitch. And that's a really important point. And it's an important thing to remember because some people think they have to do one thing to counteract a reed that's playing sharp, when in fact, the reed is not developed enough. It is going to be sharp when it's too stiff and too thick. So this one is kind of at that point. And if I put it in a chanter right now, I bet it will play, but I bet it will play sharp and pretty damn hard. So I will put it in a chanter and we'll find out for ourselves, my God. Okay, here we go. Little wrapping thread. And this is on one of my Crowley staples. The other one that we tied up that's still drying. That was, this is not a Crowley staple. This is for my Rousum. The other one was for my Crowley chanters. This is for the Rousum.
So Michael, do you actually want to try playing the reed without putting the bridle on first?
I do that. I do that actually almost always, but not 100% of the time. And that's what I'm going to do. And then I'll put a bridle on. I'll just show you. Man, putting a bridle is not hard. It's very specific, but it's not actually all that difficult. Let's see. Oh, I need a bag. Here, this bag will do.
How do you feel about mouth blowing into the headstock to test reeds? Do you try to avoid it and use the bag?
Mouth blowing a reed, sticking it in the chanter and putting the reed in your mouth? Is that what you're saying?
No, putting a headstock over it and then blowing into the headstock.
Oh, I'll do that, but not for more than a few seconds. And knowing that it's going to at least temporarily change the reed. I can't say that I've ever ruined a reed that way. I'll even stick it in my mouth sometimes, but only for a second or two. And I just don't think it brings up the moisture level or saturates the reed in any way. It'll change it, but as soon as it comes down to ambient humidity level, moisture content, it'll be, the same, I think, personally. Yeah, this is going to be hard, bright. We don't know what else it's going to do wrong, but it may have, could be some wrong things. It's all exhibiting all of the characteristics of a reed that is just way too hard. So I have to keep working on it. And that's what I'm going to do. Now, I could put a bridle on, and I can get rid of some of that harshness by closing it slightly, and I may do that pretty early on. Let me look at it. Let me think about it. Oh, you couldn't even see that whole process, could you? Because I always forget to do this. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty open. Okay, I'm going to do two things. Right now, I'm going to trim the tip, which I haven't done at all, by the way. Ultimately, you rarely make a reed where you don't trim the tips back so that they're at least perfectly even and not this, original cut. So I'm going to trim them. I'm going to show you how I do that, and this is just my own idiosyncrasy, but it works really well in spruce. But I have to do this on the, well, maybe you can see it. Okay. I have a little wooden block. I'm going to set it down. I'm going to take the reed and a single-edged razor blade that's relatively sharp, hopefully. And I'm going to set the blades on where they're maybe half the blade length or less or more, it doesn't matter, but not right at the edge. And I'm going to set the blade on top of the blades. I'm going to set the razor blade on top of the reed blades, and I'm going to take this little hammer and do this little storm the Bastille thing. Okay, off with his head. And it just makes a really clean and perfect cut in spruce. If you want to do it, you can. I don't necessarily suggest it. Now I'm thinning, you can't see this, but I'm thinning the edges a little bit more, but only the edges. One thing I like to point out is that this reed gurgled on the bottom D, and that happens a lot, but it's almost to be expected. It's another sign that there's too much wood there, that it's too hard, and oftentimes it's evenly removing wood. Sometimes it's actually removing more wood up near the bridle or down near the bridle, whichever way you see that. So I have here copper wire. I'm going to take about, I don't know, was that about 5 inches or so. It's a bit wasteful, but I hate for it to run short. And I'm going to, I'll do it over here. I need a helper. I need somebody to switch my cam. Hey man, can you switch my cam? Wow, you really switched my cam, man. Okay.
Michael,
Yeah.
Ted, we didn't hear that. Try again.
What didn't you hear? What didn't you hear?
Ted came on screen and his mouth was moving, but I didn't hear what he said.
Oh, Ted, you're going to need to unmute yourself.
I did, I thought. Anyway, what gauge of wire are you using, Michael?
I use 24 gauge. It's 20 thousandths.
Right.
Right. And here's a little word of warning about if you go to the hardware store and buy these little packages that are in kind of a plastic formed, vacuum formed little things.
Blister pack.
The gauging sometimes is wrong. I bought 24 that ended up being 22, and I bought 24 that ended up being 26 or something like that. The gauging was wrongly labeled. The other thing is that it is often not dead soft. So the wire that I'm using, which is hardware store wire because I need to order some good wire, I actually took it off the plastic spool and I annealed it. Well, it turned it kind of black. But at least it's dead soft. you kind of want it dead soft. As soon as you start bending it, it stiffens up. I wish you could get 25 gauge, but you can't. 24 gauge is good. It seems too heavy if it's too hard. And I'm afraid the stuff at the hardware store from Ace Hardware is sometimes too hard. Okay. All right. So here, I have my wire. I'm going to lay it down on here. I'm going to grab it right at the wrapping in the middle with my thumbnail. I'm going to bend it over like that. And I'm going to wrap firmly, and yet I'm not trying to crush the thing, but I don't want any gaps. And I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And I think I'm going to go. So, depending on which side you count it on, I actually have 5. I think I have 5. Now, it's 4 complete things. And then I'm going to pull the edge up. Where is that? Pull the edge up. And I'm going to grab these two things, pulling it out, and I'm going to give it a little twist. You have to be careful that it doesn't all come apart or that it doesn't catch the wrapping, which you don't want it to do. It doesn't matter really if it comes out a little off-centered. It doesn't really matter. But what you're going to do at this point is you're going to clip it, not too short, and then you're going to grab that with nice little smooth-jawed pliers, and as you tighten it, you're going to pull out slightly, and you're going to twist and bring it down. So the upper wrap actually traverses across to the other one, and that helps the thing lie down. So now we have a wrap. 4 wires broad if you look on the side without the twist on it. And I'm going to close it down quite a lot. And I can do that with thumb and forefinger. And that's close. That might be actually very close. It sounds a little bit weak, but it still could be gurgling. We'll see.
So, Michael, you said that the hardware store wire was too hard, so you had to anneal it. But where is your preferred supplier for this thing?
Well, I don't know. There are places, but you could, what you want is you want a reputable firm to sell you copper 24 gauge wire dead soft. And I get mine from R.J. Leahy in San Francisco, which I've been buying brass and copper and nickel silver from them, not all sizes of nickel silver, but pretty much all the brass that I could possibly want. I've been buying that for years. R.J. Leahy. It's an old company, family operated, small metal supplier to industry and to hobbyists too. Not like a retail place at all. And they have not a wide selection of stuff, but they have all kinds of wire. You can get copper rivets from them. You can get nickel silver sheet that comes in annealed coils. They're probably 50 feet long, and they'll cut off a foot of it, 12 inches wide, of varying gauges that they have. You can get sheets of copper, and so on. So it's once again, it needs more material removed, and that will come around. It'll be just dandy, I think. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting. There we are. I'm taking more material off. In this case, I'm taking off right up towards the bridle and less at the tip, and I'm going a little bit towards the sides. Remember those thick part, the little shoulder I was talking about? I'm getting rid of that a little bit. But I'm not really reducing the tips much because that won't affect the gurgle all that much. And the general sanding is going to bring the back D down. It'll bring the overall pitch down, but it'll bring the back D down more than anything else. So what I find is that I'll make, anywhere from 2 to 6 reeds or something like that. And then I'll work on them over a period of, maybe a good while. If I need 2 of them right away for a chanter that's going out the door, well, I'll pick the 2 that come around the quickest, and then I'll work on those to the point that, and this is not working on them all the time. This is spending a few minutes here and a few minutes there over subsequent days. No, it hasn't come around yet. Yeah, we'll see. This is, by the way, a spruce that I haven't worked with as much. My tendency is, because of the way it's behaving right now, to think that I may want to go a little bit thinner on the initial centerline thickness of the gouge. Yeah. That was a sound. What was that? It's like sounded like somebody's dust extraction system. Do you know? Anyone know what that was?
I think someone walked away and they're putting something in there out of the microwave is what it sounded like.
Oh, that could be.
So I posted in the chat, I found the website rjleahy.com, and I put a link for the wire there.
Oh.
If anyone's interested.
Yeah, they never seem to have a problem with ordering small quantities of things. So, and you will only be able to get that. Unfortunately, you only be able to get that wire by a pound spool. So it's not cheap, but nonetheless, there it is. I mean, you can take your chances with hardware store. The other thing is that people use it in hobby stuff. So you might be able to find somewhere with smaller quantities available.
Yeah, that pound spool will be a lifetime of reed making.
Well, that's a lot. A pound spool is a lot of wire.
That 1 pound spool is only $18, so that's not terrible.
Not too bad.
Now, do you also buy your material when you're hand forming a staple? You buy that from them as well?
Soft copper sheet, yeah. I mean, I've gotten it from other places too, but mostly from them. I was going to show you a little funny thing that I made for something else, but it's kind of handy. You see the little notches in the plier? See the little notches?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, watch this. So you want to open a reed, and closing a reed is thumb and forefinger works fine. Opening it's a little bit harder with your thumb and forefinger. It just grabs the reed so easily so that it can't slip sideways. I find it very, very positive way to open a reed. Oh, I'm talking about the world's smallest amount of pressure here.
Michael, do you ever use the wire bridle to open a reed? Like, twist the ends a bit to add a little pressure.
No, I feel that what I want to do is, I mean, I'm using the bridle, but I'm just using it by squeezing the edges, just changing the shape of the bridle slightly, which it will hold.
Hey, Eva.
Huh?
Sorry, I thought I was on mute.
Closer and closer. It needs to probably be set out slightly. That'll help the back D come down a little more. It needs to be played a bit more before I really do much else to it, I think. But, it came around with a little bit more work than they sometimes take, although I wouldn't complain too much. That does sound better to you, doesn't it? A little bit?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the bottom D is getting there, and the rest of the scale is getting there, but you can tell the back D is still a little too much material.
Not as much as it was.
No, not at all.
And the bottom D didn't gurgle at all on that particular thing. But then again, reeds, when they're brand new, they have a little kind of journey to make before they settle in. And you can't try to rush through all your decision making and your actions to fix stuff. If you go too quickly about it, I think you stand a good chance of spoiling the reed before
Yeah, you don't want to judge them too soon.
What's that?
You don't want to judge them too soon.
Yeah. I'd say it's pretty close.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Pretty dang close, yeah.
For having
Very
only
nice.
started it yesterday, that's pretty good.
Right. Actually, last night. I think I tied this reed up at 10 o'clock last night.
Wow, it's already playing. That's great.
Yeah. And I have another one that I could do, which is spruce that I'm a little more familiar with, and it probably would come around faster. But I'm not gonna do that now because I'm not. I'm gonna take.
So, Mike, do you think this is something that will come around in the next few minutes, or do you want to kind of cut it here? What do you think?
I'm not very dissatisfied with where this is at.
No, not at all. No, that's not what I'm saying. It's just,
in my normal work, this is a point where I would probably stop for a while.
Right. That's where I was going.
Pick it up 4 hours later or the next day.
Yeah.
Right? So that's as far as that read, but I don't know if that's what you meant.
That is what I meant. It was, this is a good stopping point, and this is what you mean by just let it be for a little bit and don't rush it.
Yeah. Now, yeah, and just in summation, I would just like to say, your sensitivity to the materials and to the behavior of a reed as you're working on it is something that you could only develop by doing it. And some people get it sometimes, and some people don't necessarily. But I encourage everybody to give it a try if you're at all interested. I think this is not a bad place to start. If you have any more questions and stuff, I'm around. I can be consulted with a little bit here and there. I am planning on trying to put up a little more in-depth stuff in a few YouTube videos at some point, where I just can spend a little more time and have a better setup for doing the videography.
Well, that was something I was just going to throw out there is, the club would be certainly happy to, host such a thing. And, we can make it kind of a live thing on a fairly regular basis, be it once a month or more frequently or whatever works with you. And, people can tune in and ask questions. And, you know, maybe it doesn't have to be as, you know, you don't have to talk your way through it. Maybe you just do it and people chime in as necessary.
Well, yeah, that could be. And the other thing is, I have had a lot of fun spending a little time describing my method of making wooden-bodied drone reeds with wooden tongues.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great topic unto itself.
Yeah.
I think people would find that really interesting. The problem is that people need, you know, there are a few tools that people are not necessarily going to have. Like for this kind of reed making, you'd really like to have a bandsaw. Well, not everybody's going to have a bandsaw or the inclination to have a bandsaw or the space to put a bandsaw. So, on the other hand, it's possible they can find somebody. But I'm also thinking about, on a very limited basis, making certain things available, like slips that are pre-cut, you know, planed one side, and just like I showed you, you know, in bundles of 5 or 10.
Yeah.
And also, I'm thinking of actually offering, you know, partly made, turned and drilled, but not flattened out drone bodies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which I think people would find really interesting. And
that'd be fairly straightforward to work with from that point. Yeah.
Yeah, and wooden body drones are pretty far out, because if one isn't working, you don't throw it away. You just take the tongue off and replace the tongue.
Yeah.
That's a very cool thing.
Yeah. Do you mind if I put your email address in the chat, Mike?
You can do that if you'd like.
Okay.
So you mentioned the other day that you had like a Tuesday morning read group that you get together with, or you do a Zoom call with?
You know, it's actually on a Wednesday morning. It's not my group, and I would not be I couldn't freely just say, "Oh yeah," and send everybody the URL for it, because I don't know that the guy that puts it on, I think he kind of likes this small little group. I mean, it's only 6 guys, but it's been a lot of the times Mick O'Brien and Jimmy O'Brien Moran have been there.
Okay.
And, you know, it's a pretty wonderful thing, but I'm not at liberty to.
It's not your meeting.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But we could do something like that, although I wouldn't want to do it once a week, but.
Oh, no. I know Phil on Facebook and stuff, and I think it'd be cool to set something up. I've got access to a professional Zoom account where, you know, we could throw a Zoom reed makers group together, just sit and whittle away at cane or whatever occasionally. I think it'd be kind of fun.
Eric, Daryl and I do that now. Daryl Werther.
Okay.
We maybe last time was like a couple of weeks ago, and we just talked about how to make a rolled staple.
Yeah.
You know, and that was really cool.
Yeah.
So,
or even just to sit and be like, at the same time, we're all working on, you know, sitting at our desk working on reeds with, you know, a Zoom open would be kind of fun, just to have a chance to, you know, commiserate.
Yeah, my problem is I'm up in my computer room. My read room is called the garage. I have to take the car out. I got to spread all my shit on top of a Costco fold-up table, and then, you know, do all that stuff. But we could do that. I think that would be worthwhile for this group.
Yeah, absolutely.
My wife take a picture of me doing what we're doing here. So on Facebook, I'll post my setup, where the desk that I'm leaning on is filled with all my reed making stuff, which would be kind of cool. So I'm just trying to get into it. So.
Okay. Well, you know, what I'm going to suggest is we maybe table this discussion until after the Piper's Chair. You know, we're going to have a social hour, and folks can be, you know, more than welcome to kind of discuss, you know, this kind of stuff, and, you know, setting up side Zoom stuff for all that kind of thing. But
Mike, what time is after Piper's Chair?
That'd be well, whenever Piper's Chair is done, but it's scheduled to end at 5-ish.
Okay.
It'll take too much longer than that.
Okay.
Even though we're running a fair bit behind, but you know, we do need to transition to the Piper's Chair.
I've got another Zoom call at 5. So Eric, you and I and Daryl, we can talk Facebook and maybe set something up.
Sure, yeah.
Down the road.
But first and foremost, I want to thank you, Mike.
Yes.
That was
yes. Thank you, Mike.
demonstration.
Thanks, Michael.
Hey, I want to thank everybody for showing up, and it is my definite wish that you guys got something out of it. And I got to read, so I think it's not too bad. A little bit of playing, and I think it'll be pretty good. Let's see. Let me try it again. It's been 5.
This is your Piper's chair, Reed. I told you.
Yeah, it's actually not. The back D is slightly sharp, but that is an easy fix.
Yeah.
Back D, that's not too hard at this point because it's just taking a little bit off the tips. Thickness, not, sanding a little bit of scrape. Bottom D is good. Scale seemed bad. The octaves seem to be perfectly great. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
It's getting there.
Sounds great, Michael. Fantastic.
Well, folks, if anyone had contacts that were in here who had joined us after 3 for the Piper's Chair and were wholly adverse to Reedmaking and left, let them know. And we'll get going in about 5 minutes with the Piper's Chair. What I'll do is I'll start with playing the pre-recorded videos that were sent to us, and then we'll open it up to whomever wants to play live.
You have that.
see, I may or may not be able to get in there. I got to check out.
Right. Where do I find the link?
I'll send it to you.
Thank you,
Thanks
Michael.
so
It's
much,
awesome.
Bye.
Thanks
Thanks
Michael,
for the
very
great
much.
presentation, Michael. I learned so much, and it was awesome to watch you at